Okay, so what we're going to cover is how to print this with the lines off of it. Because you guys don't want all this dotted lines and lines that indicate where your folds and cuts are. That's not the way it's really done. When you guys pick up packaging, you don't see lines on the corners of where things fold, do you? Those are turned off. Those are made invisible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to print this twice. I'm going to print it without the design, with just the template. And then I'm going to turn that design back on and turn off the cut file or template file, and I'm going to print that. So I'm going to print this twice. What I'm going to do then is those printouts, I'm going to sandwich them together and tape them together, one on top of the other, perfectly registered. Okay? And I'm going to, I won't be able to video record this, but you guys are going to walk back there and I'm going to show you how to manage the cutting and the folding of this. Sound good? Okay. But I'll just walk you through the printing process for now, and this is the part that I'm recording. Okay, so the first thing I mentioned was I'm going to print one thing with or without the template. So I'm going to turn the template off in this case. I'm going to print without the template. I'm printing just the design. Now if I hit the W key, that means this is what it's going to see, what I'm going to get when I print. So if I see any surprises, like, oh, remember this little guy right here, this little red box? He was my 1/8 of an inch box. I don't need him anymore, so I probably should delete him. He's out in, not in the live area, but I'm going to get rid of things I don't need. Make sure things don't have strokes on them. When you hit the W key, as long as you're not in a tight box, sometimes you will find out that you have accidentally set something to have a stroke. And when you do that, I'm going to try to get this to have a stroke on it. When you are in the regular working preview mode, you oftentimes don't see that you have a stroke on something. So these all look like they have strokes on them, don't they? Looks like there's some border on the edges. Well, this is in the working mode, and those are bounding boxes, and the bounding boxes don't print. But when I hit the W key, you will see that this does not have a stroke, the blue does not have a stroke, but oops, my yellowish green has a stroke. So we want to make sure we take the strokes off of things that don't need to be on there. So what you do to take a stroke off is you click on the object, and I like to use the tools panel. I like to make it more squat. So by default it's really long like this. That means I have to travel further to find things, and it also means that some of these icons are really tiny and you can't see them very well. So I click on this double arrow, and sometimes I'll move my little InDesign file open so I can see my little close button. But I'll click on that double arrow and it will make my toolbar half as long, and the fill and stroke areas are large. Much easier to work with. So the fill is the solid square and the stroke is the one that looks like a square with a hole in it. A square donut, I call it. Now you don't want to click on the flipper, because what that does is it says, oh, you want a stroke of what the fill was, and you want the fill of what the stroke was, that color. It switches your fill and stroke color. Oops, just click on that again and it'll go back to what you had before. So don't use him unless you actually did want to flip the colors. So to get the stroke to come up, that option, if you click on it, it'll come up. So if I click on the fill color, it's active. When I click on the stroke, it's active. And all I'll do is click on this little tiny symbol that says apply none. I want to apply nothing. Click on that, and now this has no stroke. Now here's a problem. I'll see if I have this problem. I'm going to turn my layers back on. I'm going to turn the cut file back on. When you apply a stroke to something, it strokes on the outside, and if this had originally been drawn to the grid, let me turn the document grid on. Now I'm hitting Command apostrophe and nothing's happening. Why is nothing happening? My grid's not turning on. Does anybody know? Let me hit the W key. Ah, W gives you the print preview, and print preview doesn't show you grids. So sometimes you have to hit the W key if you're like, hey man, this Command apostrophe thing is not working. If you can't, like it is now because I have the regular working mode on. So think of W as working mode, or what you see is what you get when you print mode. I know that's a long phrase, but working mode meaning you can see the bounding boxes, you can see the guides, or what you see is what you get. You just hit the W and toggle back and forth. Now, let's show you a problem. I want to show you a problem. Let's see here. If I had originally drawn this with a stroke on it, so let me go ahead and apply a stroke, because many of you have accidentally applied strokes. And if you've snapped to the grid, this actually snaps to the outside of that stroke. Oops, I hit the flipper. It snaps to the edge of the stroke, not to this blue bounding box. And let's say you accidentally had some strokes on some things. And you decide, maybe we're zoomed out, maybe we have the cut file turned off, and we decide, and let's hit the W key to get rid of all the noise, and we decide to take this stroke off. Okay, I click on the square with a hole, and I say no, none. Well, what has just happened because I accidentally had a stroke on it in the beginning is that it no longer aligns to the grid. See? Darn it. I'm going to hit Command Z. It'll put that stroke back on there. All right? So when I take a stroke off, I oftentimes have to make sure that that color, that solid color, goes back and is snapping to the grid. Because if it doesn't, let me show you what's the problem here. If it doesn't, and I have a whole flap right here, maybe it's a whole different color, you'll see that on the fold line, it will have a little bit of white. So we have to make sure we solve those problems. Try to make sure that when you're drawing a solid object that the stroke is on none to start with. That solves the problem.
What if you change the stroke to the same color?
You could do that. Yes, that's a really good solution to the problem if you don't want to fuss around with it. So the question is, why not just change this item to have the stroke be the same color as the fill? And I'm like, well, you know what? That's a pretty darn good point. There it goes. Now, I would probably not make that a habitual thing. I would probably try to start out with the fill of a color and the stroke of none, just to start out with. But if you're trying to save time and you've already accidentally had a stroke on there, that makes a lot of sense. It may pose problems down the road having a stroke on something that you didn't want to stroke on. Maybe. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my layers. And because I've messed around with this little guy here, he's gotten a little wider on other areas because they didn't have the stroke, so I'll pop him back. So it's usually best to err on the side of getting it right the first time, then we don't have to deal with it. Who wants to deal with it? But as we're learning about things, sometimes it's hard to get it right the first time. Okay. Now, I'm going to turn again the cut file on and the document grid off, just to remind us what we have here. And we're going to print, again, just the design. So we're going to turn the cut file off.
Good morning.
Good morning. I might hit the W key to make sure I'm not seeing any weird little white trap spaces, or if I'm seeing any strokes, I'll have to fix all that. And once you have everything pretty much under control and everything's nice and perfect, we're ready to print. Okay? So you'll be printing to the color printer even though it's a draft. You could choose to print the cut file to the black and white printer because it'll cost you less money. It's going to be the same size. So why not save us a little bit of money, and we'll print the cut file to the black and white, and we'll print the color file to the printer, color printer. So I turned off the cut file and I'm ready to print. I go to File and Print. And we need to choose the color printer here where it says Printer HP A150. That's a black and white printer. I'm going to use Color A printer. It's low on yellow, but it's still printing fine. It just, if you look at those and it has a warning that says it's low on something, it doesn't deplete the print value. It's just a warning for us to order more toner, and don't worry, I have yellow toner. So I've got some of that. So I'm going to print to the 7800A printer. And because most of you guys have a larger file, we would then go to the setup and we would change our paper size to tabloid. Now, for whoever has Jakeman's, you may be able to get away with printing yours on letter because it's a smaller package. For those of you guys who have Dr. Bronner's soap, you may have the same luxury of printing to an 8.5 by 11 versus 11 by 17. Don't know yet. You have to see how big your file is. So we're going to change this to tabloid, which is 11 by 17. And here, where this little preview is, it should be centered. Especially, you want to get into the habit of making those centered, especially later on if you're going to print something double-sided. If things aren't centered, they don't match up. So we want to just get in the habit pretty much every time to go ahead on page position and click on centered. It's just a good habit to get into. Now, later on, we're going to be printing to larger paper, which is going to be a whole separate issue, a whole other bunch of problems, a whole other bunch of notes on printing. So this is just for our drafts. Don't you just love her? Okay, I'm not going to worry about crop marks because the crop marks on 11 on this is going to be nuts. They're not going to make any difference. We've actually built a template, and that's going to be fine. That's going to be what we're using for our crop marks. We don't have to set a bleed because we actually had to pull the bleed past our template. We had to manufacture all this stuff. So we don't need to worry about this because it's already been manufactured. Okay, now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to the lower, here in the lower right-hand corner, left-hand corner, page setup. I'm going to hit OK. And by the way, I'm recording this, so don't worry. So when I hit the page setup and hit OK, what we're looking for here is we're looking for these two to match what I had before. Most of the time they do, but they don't always. This is why I always check. So later on when we're printing, say, maybe from a PDF, we always have to change this if we're printing from a PDF. So this is why I try to get you guys in the habit of doing this. Even though I already know if I'm printing from InDesign, it's going to be all right. I just get in the habit because you just want to double check. It's better to err on the side of being a little too cautious, I suppose. And I hit OK. Everything looks good. Now I'm going to click on Printer, which is the second button from the left, lower left corner. On this warning, we hit OK. You can hit Don't Show Again if you don't want to see that again. It'll show it again after you come in the next day because of the deep freeze we put on these computers. And here, if you do not want two-sided, most of you guys are not printing two-sided. Some of you are. But if you don't want two-sided, we uncheck that. So I am not printing two-sided, so I'm going to uncheck that. Now, if I cared about my color, I could click on Show Details and go to color matching. And it seemed like when we did the other profile here, so this again was, let me go slower. We hit Show Details after we unchecked two-sided printing. And here where it said Layout, we clicked on that layout and went to color matching. So you actually have to go find this stuff. So Show Details, click on Layout, and then the flyout menu comes up and you get color matching. And where the profile says automatic, I know in our previous project we changed that to Photoshop 5 and the colors were coming out a little bit better. So if color is something that you are concerned about, go to Other Profiles and then find Photoshop 5, default CMYK. Hit OK. Now, later on, when we're printing to this heavier cardstock that's 12.5 by 19, it's really called cover stock, but the printer calls it cardstock, and the paper mills call it cover stock. So it's really cover stock. But here, in this area where we clicked on layout or color matching, later on, we're going to be going to Xerox Features. Excuse me. And here is where we're going to set the heavier type of paper. Now, I'm not going to do it now because the paper in there is plain white and I'm just doing drafts. But I'm just letting you guys know that we're going to end up going here and we're going to end up setting, if you're printing on a cream color paper, you click here and you choose another color. If you're printing on a heavier cardstock, then we need to figure out which one we're printing on. We've learned that the biggest weight that it can take is 130. We put it through its test yesterday, and it sounded kind of crazy going through, but it took 130 and printed on it just fine. So for those of you guys who are spec'ing the heavier paper, the printer does sound like it's kind of, gears are really grinding. It's made for this. Otherwise it wouldn't say you can use 130-pound paper. But the 130-pound paper was extra heavyweight cardstock, which was right here. And that was for 130-pound paper. Now, how do I know that's 130-pound paper? Well, on the actual printer itself, there's a guide near where you put the paper, and it tells you what the weights are. If you have a 100-pound cover, what do you set it at? It'll tell you 100-pound cover, I think, is just heavyweight cardstock. And then an 80-pound would be like a regular cardstock. A 60-pound would be a lightweight cardstock. So these things actually do matter. And if this does not, if we don't set this in the printer to have the same exact thing and the same exact size, it will not print. So this is for later, but I wanted to get you guys kind of familiar with looking at that area. And again, that was found here. Let's go back just a second. I'm going to hide these details. I'm going to review a bit. We turned off two-sided, assuming you're not printing two-sided. We hit show details. And this was found by clicking on the word layout. By default, the word layout will be up. And we went to Xerox features for that one. Sure we did. So later on, we're going to be using that Xerox feature thing. Some of you already did that on the previous project because you had the pleasure of having a thicker, nicer paper stock that was bigger. But most of you don't have that experience yet. Okay. So I'm going to go back here to layout, and I'm going to hit print here, which is basically in essence hitting OK. It's not really going to print anything. Now everything looks good here. I have the 7800 color. I have tabloid set up in my setup. I don't turn marks and bleeds on because we built those. I went to page setup, checked that, went to printer. Everything looks good, so I'm going to hit print. And that's just the design part of it. Now what I do is I turn the template on and the design part off. Oh, yeah, I've got to pay for that. There we go. I turn the template on and the design part off. Now I'm going to print to the black and white printer because it charges less money. So let's go to File and Print. And here where it says 7800 color, I'm going to choose the 8150 black and white. That's in the printer area. And under the setup, it should remember, assuming I didn't restart the computer or restart InDesign, it will actually kind of remember your last setup. But I always double check. So tabloid was my last setup. The page position was centered. I didn't have any marks or bleeds. I need to go to page setup, make sure that says 8150. And tabloid. Hit OK. Oh, by the way, you may have to print from a PC in the lab versus a Mac, and the PC by default automatically has like scale to fit checked on, so it'll force your stuff to be a different size. So always double check, both on Mac and PC, but especially on the PC, that scale to fit is not checked. And on the PC, it would be don't rotate or no. Gosh, what's the word they're using? I think it says full size or something. So make sure full size is checked on. Here it's full size because it says 100% by 100%. Okay, so the only thing really I had to change here so far was the HP 8150. I'll go to the printer button and make sure there's nothing I have to change there. Two sides turned off. Yep. And here I really don't need to worry about color matching and all that. So I'm just going to hit OK or print. And I'm going to print this as well. So I'm going to have two of these. One to the cheap black and white printer, and the other, this one's to the black and white printer, and the other, the design, to the color printer. Okay. I'm going to save this. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run down there and I'm going to grab those and we're going to do a demo and I'm going to show you some tools that I use so that you, gosh, I should really print this to a thick paper. I'm going to print this to a thick paper so I can show you some of these tools that I use. This thin paper, I don't need these tools because it's super thin. So I'm going to print this actually to a, IT, I don't know if they fixed this, so I'm going to cut this down to, I'm going to cut this paper down because I don't think IT has fixed the printer drivers here yet. We couldn't print to 12.5 by 18 in the classroom. So the other class, they're a little ahead of you guys. We had to go down to the PC lab and we had to print from the PCs because the PC printer drivers are loaded properly and we could print to the larger format paper. But we could not get the larger format paper to print properly here in the Mac lab because the printer drivers are not loaded quite right. It would print to 12.5 by 19. It just would cut things off. Cut off part of the design. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and print to the color printer on some heavyweight paper so you guys can see how we use some of these tools. This is probably 80-pound cover weight paper. How do I know that? I've been around paper a long time. Weird, isn't it? So this is probably 80-pound cover. So now you get to see me go through the advanced feature that you guys are going to go through later. Now on the setup, I'm going to just make this tablet because I'm going to cut this down because my project's small enough to be able to fit on tabloid. So here I'm going to go to the page setup, make sure it says tabloid. Then I go to the printer, and now I'm going to go to the Xerox features like I'd said before. And it's white paper, so I'm just going to deal with the type. And if this is 80-pound cover, then it's heavyweight cardstock according to the printer down there. I'm pretty sure. Don't mark my word. I usually have to run down there and look. I need to take a picture of that chart. I don't have a smartphone and my camera's broken, so I need somebody to take a picture of that chart and we can print it out and put it up here in the wall. That we don't have to go running back and forth all the time. The other thing I need to do before I print this is, now this I do have to run. I got to run down there and take the 11 by 17 out of the automatic feed tray because if I don't do that, it's going to automatically print on the crappy paper. And it's going to charge me. So it may automatically print on that thin, nasty paper. So I may have to do a little running. So I'm going to set this to heavyweight cardstock because I know this is 80 pound and I hope that's the right one. I'm going to cut this down to 11 by 17, which won't take me long because I got that cutter down there. I'm going to hit print. Now I'm going to run down there and I'm going to take that paper out and I'm going to cut this paper down. How many of you guys have had to change a paper? We've all had to change a paper style, haven't we, on the printer? No, you guys, last time we printed on just plain paper stock and it went through, didn't we? Okay, well I'm going to run down there. I'm going to have to stop the recording. But I'm going to run down there and pull the paper out, put this one in. If you guys have not changed the style of paper on the printer before, you probably want to come and follow me because you need to know how to set these printers up. It will charge you for printing even if you set this thing up improperly. So if you don't set the printer end up properly and it doesn't match this end, which is 12 and a half, this end is 11 by 17 heavyweight cardstock. If that's not 11 by 17 heavyweight cardstock down there, if you don't have it set up, and it's not going to automatically be set up, you guys have to manually do this. If you don't have it set up for the same size and the same style, it will charge you to print and you will get nothing. Am I clear on that? You guys don't want to get charged for something and not get anything. So if you don't know how to change that, you please come down with me. I'll if it's a big group, I'll show it a few times. Don't leave anything of great value in here because somebody will walk by and take it.